Welcome to the Chief Endurance Officer Podcast. I'm your host, Greg McDonough. Each week, we hear real time stories from athletes and CEOs on how to maximize performance through an endurance mindset. Let's get started. Well, welcome to the show. I am super excited of our guest today. She is a professional speaker, fractional operations specialist, driven entrepreneur, fellow Ironman finisher, has a strong background in media and business, working with major organizations like Bloomberg and Integral Ad Science. The co-host of the successful podcast, Managing Chaos, where she dives deep into strategic operational planning, mentor at the Engage New York Executive Council, and executive member of Dreams and Doers. Please welcome Katrina Purcell. Katrina, it's great having you on the show.
I'm tired hearing all the things that I do.
And I left out half of them, so we'll leave that to the audience to discover.
Yes, you hit all the important ones.
Awesome. Well, Katrina, as you know, I love talking about the endurance mindset. So I'm curious, how has your endurance mindset impacted your life unexpectedly?
I don't know if it's unexpectedly, although I will say I fell into endurance sports unexpectedly. I was not an athlete growing up. In fact, when I completed the Ironman, both my brother and sister were in kind of shock and awe because as a child, they were the ones who were shuttled from sport to sport, and I was very academically focused. And I think my endurance was more in studying as opposed to physical endurance. But I think for me, it's the structure. So I have always loved structure. I've always thrived in structure, and the thing with endurance training is that it's so structured, and it can be a little addicting if you have a personality that really loves to be structured. And so for me, it's really the structure, and then also just the sense of accomplishment, right? So you set that big, huge goal. For me, I trained well over a year for my Ironman. I was an amateur. I knew nothing. And so it was really just the culmination of all that work, but you have to stick with it, right? You have no choice but to keep going because you want to achieve that high when you cross that finish line.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, you reminded me back on my first one, and it was about a year's worth of training for sure. And I still felt undertrained when I got to that starting line. I'd love to know how you've seen that show up in your life in other areas, like that long 1 year, year and a half sort of goal oriented, the dark mornings, the dark afternoons where it's just you by yourself sort of getting at your training or into work. Like how have you seen that show up in other places in your life?
So I most definitely like to take very big swings. So even for running, I was never really a big runner. And most of this actually can be blamed on my friends. And so when they say the people you surround yourself with, so I did my first running event was actually a half marathon because my best friend wanted to do a half marathon. And so she said, "Do you want to do it with me?" I said, "I guess, sure." I hated it. The whole time I was training, I thought, this is horrible. I'm never doing this again. This is just, it turned out to be a gateway drug. I crossed that finish line and I was like, this was I forgot all the training that led up to it. And I thought, I'm doing this. I'm going to keep going. But for me, it's all about setting the goal and sticking with it until I get it. So I did an executive MBA program shortly after I finished the Ironman. And so I replaced 2-a-day workouts with going on Saturday and sitting for 8 hours, which was actually arguably much more difficult, to be honest, and learning for 2 years. But when you start to think about it, okay, well, I did 15 hours and 45 minutes of continuous working out. Surely I can now do whatever, insert new goal here. It can't possibly be as difficult as that. And so I think it helps to reframe things.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And even thinking about like hard training days, I've never come across a situation in work or even family that has felt more difficult than those tiring, difficult days of like your nutrition fails, you're in the middle of a race where you're on your long ride. I'm curious though, like going from the half marathon into an Ironman, like walk us through that progression. Did you have races in between or?
I did have races in between. So I did my first, the first half marathon, and then I proceeded, if that was in like November, and the next year I proceeded to do 8 half marathons. And I said, I'm only half crazy. People were like, you're going to do a full. And I was like, no way. Definitely not doing a full. 13.1 is perfect. One of my other friends was like, really want to do a full? You just maybe do a full with me? I said, you know what? Yeah, let's do it. So we did a full. And in the process of training for that, she's like, I've been looking into this thing called triathlons. And I was like, what now? And she goes, yeah, you swim, you bike, and you run. And I was like, I can't swim. And she was like, surely you can swim. You grew up with a pool. And I said, well, I cannot drown. But that's like very different. And I said, also, when my dad taught me to ride a bike, I used to jump off if I thought I was going to fall. So I don't think triathlon is for me. And she was like, yeah, but I want you to do it with me. And so it took her about a solid, probably 6 months of trying to convince me. To be fair, the first race we did was actually a half iron. We did Eagle Man. And
Great race.
I do think this was partially her way of getting her husband to let her get a new bike, because guess who bought her old bike to start training? But she's an amazing friend and mentor to me, and she was actually my very first boss out of college, and we've remained friends. And so she still, though, has not convinced me. She is now doing ultra, like she is not. I'm like, I can't. My knees and I are not friends with that, and she has not yet to convince me to do trail racing or any kind of ultra marathon.
Well, I picked up the yet in there, so I sense there's a small possibility.
There's always a yet.
Yeah, my yet at the moment is gravel or bike riding. I've got a handful of friends and colleagues that are super into gravel. And for me, it's kind of like I've been skiing all my life, and I'd really like to try snowboarding, but I don't want to waste all those years of learning how to ski and trying something new. And anyway, we can go on and on about that. Katrina, I'd love to understand how your experience with endurance racing and this year's worth of planning, years worth of training, how does it show up in the work that you're doing?
Yes. So I do operational work. A lot of what I do is mindset, to be honest, right? Because people are afraid of ops. When everything is running smoothly, no one thinks about operations. When everything is not running smoothly, everything is all about operations. And so people tend to be scared of it. And I think people also tend to be scared of endurance sports because it's somewhat unknown, or they feel like there's a piece of them that isn't the right piece needed to do something. And so I think it's a very similar mindset that I did when I was training for the Ironman. I would actually coach people who were like a little bit less knowledgeable than I was, right? And so it's this concept of you already know more than someone. You can be giving back to someone, right? And so it's really walking people through the small steps, the very achievable steps, setting milestones that are less aggressive than you're going to go run 26 miles, right? And that's the great part about training for an Ironman, in my opinion. I had an amazing coach who really broke everything down. And it was sort of, you're going out and you're running 2 miles. That's it. And then suddenly you realize 6 months later, now your training run is something you were horribly scared of 6 months ago. And so within ops, it's the same thing. It's sort of, let's create an SOP. Let's just start to think about what the process should be, right? And let's break it down into small things. And then in 6 months, it'll be somewhat unrecognizable what you're doing on a daily basis. And then there's the new goal.
As somebody who works with a lot of entrepreneurs, and there's a ton of entrepreneurs that listen to this show, let's unpack that, or at least get a little bit deeper. Like, you're a business owner, a couple $1 million in revenue, hopefully. You're kind of just waking up and fighting the fight every day, and you start Monday and you hopefully end on Friday. Like, let's unpack that a little bit more. Like, when should we be really getting into documenting operations, SOPs?
Mm-hmm.
Like, what's a good first step in that process?
Well, the first step for me is when you start to think about that you want to take a week off. So are you your whole business? Can you take a week off? So let's say you've signed up for a race and you're excited to go do it, but then you're starting to think about, how am I actually going to do this race? Because my business can't run without me. And so if you are that integral to your business's success, that's the time to start sitting down and thinking about what is a process that you're doing, but doesn't necessarily have to be you. It could be someone on your team. It could be someone that you outsource to. Dan Martell has a great book called Buy Back Your Time. And I love the concept from that book because it's sort of, let's start to think about how much would you pay someone to do this task? Is it less than you're paying yourself? In which case, that task should be off your plate unless it's something that brings you such immense joy that you just really want to keep doing it. We get into our businesses because we have something that brings us passion, that we are excited about. And that's why we start our business, because we think, oh, if I'm doing this thing that I love to do. But then all the other aspects of running the business just fall onto you because there's no one else for them to fall onto. And as the business starts to grow, for some reason, we just feel comfortable, right? And so from an endurance perspective, I would sort of compare it to like that easy ride where you're just like, oh, this is my speed I'm comfortable at. Could I go harder? I could. Could I go slower? Probably. But I just feel comfortable at this pace. And I feel like a lot of times that's how we approach our business. We just get to this comfortable pace and we're like, okay, I'll just keep going. But the thing is that if you were to push harder, you could probably get your business to go farther. But in order to do that, you have to leave a few things behind. And those are those processes that you need to start kind of siphoning off and start to create sort of an SOP for.
I have been swimming in pools for over 50 years, and I'm the proud parent of 2 competitive year-round swimmers. I can tell you firsthand that chlorine is great at keeping pool water clean, but it's also an aggressive bleach. Clinical studies show it strips natural oils, weakens hair, and irritates skin after every swim. That's where TryHard comes in. A pre- and post-swim care line used by Olympians and pro athletes, approved by dermatologists, and proven to protect your skin and hair from chlorine damage. Swim without compromising your skin and hair with TryHard. Use code TCEO for 20% off their website. You know, you get comfortable just doing work and being busy. How does that resonate with you?
I'm comfortable being very busy, right?
Right.
So for me, I mean, I have always been someone who kind of doesn't like the status quo and likes to sort of, I mean, I drove my parents, I think, absolutely bonkers. And now I'm getting it back in spades. My mom keeps saying, I told you. So, I moved to New York when I was 25 for a job, left home in Virginia and kind of never looked back. I think my mom thought, okay, she'll go there for like a year or two. It'll be really scary, daunting city, and surely she'll come home. But I thought, no, I'm still here, loving it. I think it's really, for me, once you set the challenge, once you achieve the challenge, it's like, what's the new next challenge? Right? How do you keep life interesting? Well, you keep life interesting by saying, okay, great, I did this physical challenge. Now I'm going to do a mental challenge. I'm going to get the MBA. Okay, now I'm going to switch my job. Oh, now I think I'll just start my own company. And my husband's always like, what's next? I'm like, who knows? You can't decide now. Do we? So obviously picking a life partner who's very, open to that and sort of willing to kind of take the journey with you. But it keeps life interesting and exciting.
Yeah, you mentioned life partner, and the question that came to mind is, were you that way when you guys first met? And I asked that question because, again, I'm living a similar lifestyle where it's like my wife has no idea which direction I'm going in tomorrow or yesterday, but it always feels like a straight line when I look back, day to
So
day.
the funny part is I would actually say mine is more of a jungle gym, less of a straight line, more of a jungle gym. I think we're always going sort of up in some trajectory, but we're kind of going left or right. I was actually training for the half iron when I met him. And so he's only ever known sort of that part of it. And so he would have to come, we would swim at Brighton Beach. He would have to come sit on the beach to watch our stuff. And me and my friends would be out swimming. And I'd be like, just, make sure her car's okay. Make sure all her stuff's on the beach. I was like, okay. And he'd be like, oh, okay. And he did it. And then we would go to Prospect Park. And, when you're an endurance athlete, I'm not fast. I'm very slow, right? But I can go slow forever. He's more of what I would call a sprinter. He can run a really fast 5K. He can run really fast. So he would run around the park and he would have a backpack with snacks and stuff for me. And he would come around while I was still, checking the wall. Give me the water, give me a snack. So he met me during that, and kind of has known no difference. That being said, I think he's the one who pushes me though it was his idea to start the company. It was not mine. I wasn't truly feeling fulfilled at work, and he sort of felt like, okay, but now is the opportunity. And I was like, is it? And he was like, yeah, do it. And so he's equal parts responsible for this direction.
So, Katrina, let's talk a little bit more about the company, the work that you're doing. I'd love to sort of understand big picture what you are doing, and then we'll get into this entrepreneurial journey as well.
Yeah, so I work with tech companies, mostly startups and nonprofits, on efficient growth and operations. And so a lot of times they don't have a CLO. In some cases they do, but they're trying to either aggressively scale or aggressively grow, and they just need a little bit of support. That could look like building 5-year strategic plans and then helping them deliver them. That could look like getting into the day-to-day nitty-gritty of a system implementation. It kind of spans the gamut depending. I only work with companies where I feel deeply kind of inspired by their mission and their vision, and I work with executive teams that I feel like fill my cup, people who I'm inspired by or people who have really big goals. And so that helps me to be a little selective about the type of work that I get to do.
And you're working with companies across the nation, across the globe?
Across the nation. I do have one company that I do work with in the UK, but mostly across the US, mostly tech based companies, just because that's where I've spent my career. From nonprofit perspective, it's mostly membership organizations. But it kind of just depends. I've done workshops and things, smaller things for other types of organizations. But mostly I would say B2B SaaS from a tech startup standpoint.
So we have a CEO founder listening to the show today, and she's struggling with something. What's that thing that she's struggling with that picking up the phone and calling you would solve or help get her through that next step?
That's a really fun question. So generally when people call me, it's because everything feels chaotic, which is why the podcast is called Managed Chaos. So when they call me, they actually normally do not know what they need. They just know they need something because everything's not sustainable. Sometimes all they need is someone to listen and then say, it's actually this. Because we're so much better at helping other people than we are at helping ourselves. And so if you're able to kind of look at your company from the outside or have an outside perspective, it's normally a lot easier to figure out what you have to do. Then the trick becomes doing it. And that's why most people who train for an Ironman get a coach, whether that's an actual person coach or just a training plan that they get from the internet, or like you always need a little bit of help. And I think when we start our businesses, we should be looking at it from that perspective. I need a coach. I need, whether it's an executive coach, whether it's just someone who is in your network who's been there, done that, right? Who can kind of just be that sounding board. I don't know if this is the same experience for you. When I was training for the Ironman, I couldn't go to my family and be like, hey guys, what should I eat on this 100-mile bike ride I'm about to go on? I mean, they were cheerleaders and they were really excited, but they didn't know how to give the right advice. And so a lot of times it's actually helping them to see the path they're on, listen, and then kind of say, hey guys, this is maybe where you want to approach it, or this is how we could look at it. A lot of times they tell me that it's just great to have someone to talk to who gets it. And I think really in life, that's all we're looking for in anything.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, some compassion, shoulder to cry on, fist pump, you name it. I also mentioned in our intro that you're a professional speaker, and you just mentioned something about workshops. Is that something you also do? Like you're a facilitator? Talk to us a little bit about the speaking workshop side of what you're doing.
Yeah, so I love to do facilitation. I have a very strong background in change management, thanks to someone who taught me very early in my career about how to bring people along. And so my favorite part about facilitation is really helping teams who are not getting where they need to be start to talk to each other and start to understand why they're not getting where they need to be. You can hire all the right talent, but not have the right structure and not have the right engagement. And they can all be horribly unsuccessful together if you're not leading them properly. And so I love to do workshops to get teams to really start to vibe, to really understand what their goals are, to set that 5-year kind of or 3-year plan, and then figure out how are they going to execute on that plan. Because I am an ops person after all. So for me, everything comes back to execution. Like, how is this actually going to happen? It's great to talk about an idea. It's great to have dreams and big visions. And believe me, I love that with everybody. But for me, it's like, okay, now what's the plan to do it? Like, you can talk. My husband hates this, right? Because he'll have this big idea and he just wants to talk about this big idea and pretend like it's going to happen. And the next thing I'm doing is like sending him real estate listings and figuring out, okay, but like, how are we actually going to do it? And he's like, no, it wasn't an executable idea. It was just an idea. I'm like, you have to qualify that, please, for me.
It's so funny. All these great ideas that I have are coming to mind. But I would appreciate if you went a little bit deeper there and talked to us about how do you actually make it happen, right? I love, to your point and your husband's point, I love coming up with big ideas and I document them and I manifest and I do all these things. The next thing you know is the to-do list just grows and the execution gets a little bit slim. Which, back to your point about having a coach, one of the reasons I'm able to execute on long distance triathlon is because I have a coach tracking and pushing and tracking and pushing and having some compassion. But there's a lot of roadblocks in between that 5-year plan vision and what are you going to do today? Like, can you give us a little insight on what your process is like?
So first of all, it's ruthless prioritization. And so what that tends to look like is not a to-do list, but a not doing list. So for most people, it actually becomes, if this is the big goal, right? And the big goal should be a truly big goal. There's a book called 10X is easier than 2X. And part of the reason 10X is easier than 2X is because you have to actually not do a lot of things, right? You have to kind of say, okay, here's actually the 10 things we're not doing. And those are the conversations that actually get truly difficult because no one wants to stop doing anything. They want that big goal. They want to be different, but they don't want to stop anything. And that was actually one of the reasons I loved Ironman training, because when you're doing Ironman training, I had, and to this day I still do, have a very bad cherry Coke addiction. However, that did not mesh well with Ironman training. I had to stop. I had to give up soda for the entirety of Ironman training because when I would have a soda and then I would try and do a ride or anything, it was terrible. And so there was immediate sort of confirmation for me, okay, well, this thing I'm doing is not going to work. In business, that doesn't necessarily always exist because, as you said before, we like to be busy. We like to do our tasks, right? We like to keep doing the same things every day. And so we don't always get that sort of immediate feedback that what we're doing isn't great. And so a lot of times what I like to do is figure out if this 10X, right? So if we need to move into a new market, what are the things that are keeping us from doing that right now? Well, our teams are really busy. Why are they really busy? What are they doing? Are they doing vanity projects? Are they doing things that are keeping, that we think still need to happen? A lot of founders who are still in the CEO seat will struggle with this because this is the company they've built. Everything that's happening is decisions that they've made. So there's a lot of therapy sort of that goes into these conversations of, okay, yes, in the moment, that was what worked. And for 2 years, that has worked, but that's not going to 10X you. That's not the thing that's going to get you to the next level. And so it's really actually figuring out what not to do. A lot of people think it's the to-do list. It's like figuring out what you need to do, but it's not. It's what's not happening, because that frees up the time for what really should be happening, which a lot of times people do know. It's just at the bottom of the list instead of at the top.
So do you use like a time analysis, a time blocking technique of like reviewing what you've been spending your time on and tasks that you've been doing to help identify these things that we shouldn't be doing to go in a going forward success?
So I do a portion of that in my personal life as well. And so even when I was training for the Ironman, everything was by the calendar and everything was color coded, right? And so you could actually, and I use Gmail, so when you color code stuff, it very easily will show you, okay, this is how much, percentage of time you spent in this color. And everything has a color, from the dog, from the school bus drop off, from, my workouts, from meal planning, so everything has a color. And at the end of the week, I can be like, okay, great. This is where I spent in all my colors. And that helps me because I'm a bit of a visual person, but also highly, I guess, logical. So I can say, okay, well, it makes sense that I spent that much time on that this week. Because there are periods of time where sometimes my workouts will suffer. Right now I'm sidelined. I have to have knee surgery, so there are no workouts. There's sit on the couch and don't do anything, which is also very difficult, to be honest. But I can look back and say, okay, I know that week would be less. So what am I filling that time with? Because the problem is we tend to, especially in our personal lives, we fill that time with what? Scrolling on social media or watching TV or something that may not be useful. And so for me, I'll say, okay, while I'm doing this, what am I going to spend my time on? Well, here's 3 books that have been on my to-be-read shelf. I should be reading those books instead. And so then that fills in the time. From a work perspective with clients, I like to do it in a way that doesn't feel so office-based. Which, by the way, my clients are getting younger and younger. I don't understand the reference to office space, which is very sad. But so I like to do it more from where do you want to spend your time? Let's start with color coding your calendar. Let's start with creating blocks. When do you feel the most creative? When would you rather answer emails? Let's create those blocks because we live in a society of such instantaneous. We have to answer that message as soon as it comes in. We have to do this as soon as we see it. But we don't really, right? And I mean, unless you're a doctor who's on call, you do not have to answer the page as soon as you get it. And so how do we set structure within a day that you're doing your most creative work when you feel your most creative, that you're answering your emails when maybe your brain is still working, but it's not as creative, right? And how do we start to create that into a schedule that you feel good about? And then we do a check-in, because just because we set something up doesn't mean it's going to work, right? So you have to keep coming back and checking in, very much like a coach does. And then the coach's job is also to dial you back a little bit, right? And so I don't know about you, but when I was Ironman training, my coach would be like, do not push this run in all capital letters. And I'd be like, should I try and run really fast for this? So there's an element of that of, okay, guys, you guys are running along really well and your exec team is gelling and everyone's getting, doing what they need to do. Let's take some moment to celebrate that. What does that look like for your team? Because a lot of times leaders get so caught up in the pushing that they forget that the team needs the celebrating.
That's powerful. Very powerful. Let's shift gears a little bit, Katrina, and talk about the Engage New York Executive Council and Dreamers and Doers. I'd love to understand what you're doing with those 2 organizations.
So Engage New York is part of the larger Engage Network, which is a mentoring platform. And the reason that I love it is because, I mentioned before, even when I was training for my Ironman, I was still mentoring people, right? So I had taken swim lessons 6 months before, and I was helping people who were too afraid to put their face in the water. And I think there's an element of mentorship that helps you learn yourself. And so mentorship has been, something that I've believed in my whole life. And this organization matches people with mentors, and it is open for organizations to come and say, hey, I have these top performers. I really want them to do better. I think they could, become the next leaders of our organization. Let's match them with mentors and help them over a structured 3-month period of what they want to learn to grow, which I just really love it. And Allison, who runs that organization, is just so committed to helping people managers, helping people become people managers. We've got a lot of companies that are fully remote these days. And I think we forget how much we actually learned early in our careers by being in an office and seeing things that were happening, or having those random interactions. We laugh now about the water cooler, but that is how you would meet people at work. You would see them in the hallway. You would kind of have these chance interactions and you would learn from that. And so what she's doing is creating a way for people to be matched with mentors. Also training people on how to be mentors, because you don't just automatically know. I mean, some people don't know how to actually be a good mentor. They want to be, but they're not sure how. So I love the work that organization is doing. And then Dreamers and Doers is actually a network for women entrepreneurs. My favorite part about that is just that I'm constantly surrounded by people who are doing way more amazing things than me. And I leave those calls being like, I'm going to do here's my next thing. And someone on one of those calls will be like, yes, that is your next thing. Let's do it. So it's just it's a group of people who I feel very akin to. They feel all like my best friends every time I get on a call. And And they really are not only just dreaming though, they're doing. And that's like the part that sometimes I struggle with, is like you get into groups where people are like, "Ah, we could." And I'm like, "But how? What is the life?" And so that group is equal amounts doing as they are dreaming, which for me is it speaks to my heart.
So I'm curious, as you think about the word entrepreneur, and this is a TEDx topic that I'm trying to develop, especially in the female entrepreneurs. I think historically we've defined entrepreneurship as somebody who builds and runs businesses. And for me, entrepreneurship is different. I think it's the encouragement to try new things. You could be a middle manager, you could be in a cubicle, you could be like just starting your career, you could be in college, you could be at home, you could be 5 years old. Like teaching entrepreneurship and having the courage to try new things and fail, to me, is really what the definition of entrepreneurship is, or on being entrepreneurial. And I'm teaching that to my girls, and my wife's the CEO of a HR tech business, and I see her being entrepreneurial. I'm curious, in the dreamers and doers, do you define it that way or something similar, where it's not just, hey, you're running a business and you're trying to sell widgets or sell a service? It's really encouraging these women to sort of get the courage, take on risk, be okay with failure, et cetera, et cetera.
I would definitely say that is the way they define it, right? And some of the women have, a full-time 9 to 5, and they have some kind of side hustle that they're envisioning, whether that's a nonprofit, whether that's a CPG, whether that's something that they're a service-based business, right? And so they may not currently be running a company, but very much like you said, they have a dream and an aspiration to go out, try something big, swing big, fail, and move on. And I think I love that you mentioned sort of that concept of failure, because I think we've raised a generation of people who are almost like too afraid to fail. And think of all the wonderful, glorious things you're missing out on by not trying something. And I'm not advocating. I am fairly risk adverse. I do like to create my checklist, and I have all my things right, and I account for the risk. But try stuff, because if you don't try and you don't fail, then you're not going to learn something new, and you're not going to grow. And you're going to be a pretty boring person, to be honest. Like, you're not going to have any interesting stories. You're not. I didn't finish a half iron in Canada. Um, the wind was so bad, bikes were literally getting blown off of the course. And I missed the bike cutoff by 2 minutes. I was really unhappy person. But luckily my parents were there to cheer me on. And while I sat in my ice bath in the hotel bathtub, it was like, okay, I'm disappointed. I'm upset. I feel like I've let people down who were like cheering me from afar. But it was a learning experience. And I knew my bike needed work, right? I knew I needed to get stronger. I knew I needed to get better on the bike. And that was pre-Ironman, right? So it was all this training data. It's all this information, all of this feedback that comes in. And do you know that post about feeling like a failure and not reaching the actual end of that race got more comments, more support, more likes, more people being like, "Oh my God, you're so inspirational," than if I had posted a picture at the end of the race, like having accomplished it. And I think it's because we're used to this culture of success, of like everyone's only posting all the happy moments and all the like great things. And you don't always hear about all the like flogs, all the like really hard training things, which is why I journaled my entire Ironman so I could read it before the race to be like, okay, yeah, there was that training day. I just didn't even want to get out of bed. And then I wrecked my bike. And then I had to cross the GW walking my bike like a little nerd, and everyone looking at me because I had wrecked my bike and I couldn't ride it back because it was broken. And so we don't talk about those things enough.
You left me a little breadcrumb that I have to pick up. You mentioned journaling with your Ironman training. Can you tell me a little bit more about what your process was there?
So my best friend's husband recommended it because he had done Arizona. And he said, throughout the training, just create a journal. He's like, I don't care what you write in it. Just write whatever you're thinking that day, or write what went well or what didn't go well, or what you hated about the nutrition, or. And he said, at the end, read it. And it's so funny. I still have it. And it's so funny to go back and look at it because it was just random thoughts. It's not, it probably means nothing to anyone else. Sometimes it would just be like, oh, the UCAN was too thick today. Or like, how did you do this? Like the sweet potatoes were too mushy. Or, don't have those next time. You don't like this goo packet. Why did you get it? But then there were some that were truly like, you woke up this morning, you didn't want to do it. You still did 60 miles, right? Like, get a new bike seat. Right? There was just like random things, where you're like, oh, that's what I felt that day. And for me, I never train with music. Because you couldn't race with it, so why train with it?
Yeah.
And so you're just alone with your thoughts. So some of them are really random. It's like 10th loop of Central Park, and at the end you go back and you're like, oh my God, like how many loops did I do of Central Park today? Why are there so many tourists? That hill really sucks. Some of them are random, but then there's like these glimmers of sort of like really inspirational moments of, I did not want to do this. I still did it. And guess what? I finished. I'm alive. Everything's fine. No one died. And yeah. And so I think sometimes when we create bullet journals or we create journals, we're like, oh, it has to be so perfect. And like, and no one has seen that journal but me. It's mine. Right. And so it doesn't have to be perfect. Just write down whatever you're thinking. They got more coherent as the training went on, but there were definitely some of them where they're like, legitimately, these calf socks suck. Like, never wear these again. Don't try this.
Refer to yesterday.
Yeah.
And would you write that at the end of the day, kind of, or at the end of your training?
So I would try to do it at the end of each training session. So, living in the city, typically in the morning, I would try to go to the pool. And then essentially on the commute from the pool to work, I would write. And then I would do in the evening, I would do my second workout, whatever that would look like, right? Whether it was strength training or my bike trainer at home. And then I would do all my long bricks on the weekends. And so it would always be kind of either before. So especially if I was having a tough day getting out there, I would write before, but then I would also write after. Because it was sort of like, it sucked. I don't want to go do this. And then you would come back and be like, I did it and it was great. And I got a PR and like, oh my God, and the fun part when you're training for your first one is like everything's a PR because you're like, I've never got this far before. And your Garmin's like, look at you, and so there's all this like positive reinforcement as you're going.
That's really powerful. I'm going to pick up that habit. Katrina, I got to ask you about your podcast. Can you give, what was the inspiration? Tell us about the show, a little bit about the content.
Well, Managed Chaos, the name came from someone who I'd worked with. I was a chief of staff for an HR tech company, and we were raising a Series B, and someone told me, you manage chaos better than anyone I've ever met. And, I think that is the chief of staff role, to be honest, is taking all the chaos and making it hum. And so that's where the name came from. The goal was really behind democratizing access to information that people needed to scale and grow their business. The episodes are 15 minutes long. The goal is that by the end of an episode, you're walking away with something that you can implement that very day, whether it's about growth mindset, change management, or maybe about a CRM and HubSpot. It's also, we have founders on who talk about, we had a founder on who talked about losing 90% of her first shipment of her CPG good because of contamination. Like, how do you get through that? Well, she did. And guess what? She's now launched more products and like she's learned lessons. And so it's about learning from other people's failures because we hardly ever talk about it. We only talk about the happy successes. And so there's a lot about other people's chaos that you can learn from.
That's awesome. We'll include that obviously in our show notes. Katrina, an audience member wants to get in touch with you. What's the best way for them to find you?
LinkedIn, most likely, just because that's where I post pretty frequently. But I have a wonderful website. It's just katrinapurcell.com. Super easy to find. And then obviously Managed Chaos. So Managed Chaos is on Instagram, and we are on all of your podcast platforms.
Brilliant. And again, those would be in the show notes. Katrina, it's been fantastic having you on. Our paths are so similar, from podcasting to Ironman to time blocking. It's been a great show. The audience members, if you got some value out of today, please subscribe to us. Please follow Katrina, find her on socials, reach out to her if you need some operational structure. You've got my mind spinning about that color-coded calendar. I've got it color-coded going forward, but looking back, it's not so organized. So I'm I've picked up a lot of value just from our conversation. Again, it's been great having you on the show. Thank you for tuning in to the Chief Endurance Officer podcast. To hear more inspiring stories and strategies around the endurance mindset, be sure to subscribe below or visit us at chiefenduranceofficer.com. Until next time, keep pushing those limits.